Okay, good morning, everyone here in Los Angeles, and even good afternoon to those joining in the East in the hemisphere. It's an honor to welcome all of you to the first joint session of the Inter-American Coalitions for Business Ethics and Regulatory Convergence in the medical technology sector. I now have the honor of introducing my president and CEO and the leader of our organization, Ambassador Robert Holliman. Ambassador, over to you.
Good morning, everyone, both virtually and here in person in Los Angeles. Delighted to be with you today. And thank you, Andrew, for the welcome and all of the participants in the sessions this week. Welcome to the Crowell & Moring offices here in Los Angeles. And it's just a real pleasure to be here. Among the distinct pleasures is really kicking off this first joint session of the Inter-American Coalitions for Business Ethics and Regulatory Convergence in the medical technology sector. And so to everyone who's assembled for this is a significant day. It's significant because we are together both in person and virtually. It is significant because of the breadth of this work. It is significant because of the coming together for the Americas of this important work. So I applaud all the leadership that has gone into making this happen and to the work that lies ahead. I served as the Deputy United States Trade Representative in the Obama administration. It was an enormous privilege of mine to be able to serve the country in that capacity. And among the issues that we certainly talked about were issues around ethical conduct, regulatory practices, and regulatory convergence. But I will note that I would have benefited and my colleagues would have benefited enormously, even more so at that time. And current colleagues at USTR who are in government and elsewhere will benefit because of the collective actions that are being taken by this sector. The kind of work that is being pulled together is literally unprecedented in any other industrial sector. There's so much work ahead that is not only a benefit for the companies and associations and organizations in this sector, but for the users, for the patients, and for government policymakers who try to improve the overall environment, and they will do so, I'm confident, with your help. So I have the distinct honor today of introducing you to Mr. Nacho Abia, who is the President and CEO of the Olympus Corporation of the Americas and Global Chief Operating Officer for Olympus Corporation Worldwide. Nacho is a committed, passionate business leader who's driving progress across the medical technology industry, and he certainly recognizes deeply the vital importance of fostering the health of patients and our region's economies. So with that, let me turn the floor over to Nacho. Thank you for your leadership, for the incredible work that you do at Olympus with AdvaMed and across the med tech sector. It's an honor and a privilege to welcome you to Los Angeles today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Holliman. Good morning, everyone here in Los Angeles and also joining from across the regional line. It is an honor to be here with you today and not only to open the first ever joint session of the two Inter-American Coalitions for Business Ethics and Regulatory Convergence in the medical technology sector, but also to preside over the formal launch of the Regulatory Convergence Coalition. As Ambassador Holliman said, my name is Nacho Abia and I serve as the Global Chief Operating Officer of Olympus Corporation. And for those who are less familiar with our company, we are the world's leader producer of endoscopes as well as a vast array of other minimal invasive equipment and medical technologies. Our innovations are utilized to support millions of patients across the world, and that's ultimately what gives the sense to all what we do in the medical sector. Like all of you here, our organization knows firsthand the importance of driving high standard in ethical business conduct as well as the advancement of regulatory convergence in order to support patient health. I have closely watched the exceptional progress all of you have made together through both coalitions since the last Summit of the Americas, particularly throughout the pandemic, and must admit how extraordinarily lucky we are to be in such a resolved industry. We care so deeply about driving patient health that we are the only sector willing to organize in this way to tackle shared challenges across the Western Hemisphere, maintaining collective momentum and dedication to sharing best practices. The medical technology sector knows how important patient health is to regions' economic and social well-being, something that, like COVID-19, has made abundantly clear. This praise is not directed at our industry alone. We also praise the many government leaders, standard-setting bodies, healthcare professionals, and the civil society organizations who are joining us in this mission. Those here with us today and every day, we are grateful to you for your vital work. Now there is still much more we must do together, from driving a high standard level playing field in ethical business conduct to widespread uptake of good regulatory practices and significant advances in regulatory convergence. Our journey has only just begun. Today's formal launch and signing ceremony of the Inter-American Coalition for Regulatory Convergence in the medical technology sector represents an important step on this journey. Initiated right at the start of the pandemic, this coalition of leading medtech industry bodies and standard-setting organizations has already made tremendous progress in partnership with the region's governments. I would like to extend particular praise to the coalition's executive secretary, Sandra Ligia Gonzalez, and the entire technical secretariat team for their hard work to coordinate efforts and build capacity. In a sign of this coalition's effectiveness, before it has even informally launched today, several thousand public and private sector representatives have already undergone training through the coalition's work, including in partnership with USAID, ANSI, or AdvaMed COVID-19 Medical Device Regulatory Convergence Initiative. This is an exceptional and no doubt just the beginning of this coalition's promise in driving true regulatory convergence in the sector across the region. With this said, I now like each coalition member association present here in LA and online to please raise your hand and ensure you are sitting along the far side of the hollow square. And if not, we will ask folks to take just a minute to reposition themselves as we prepare for the formal launch and signing ceremony of the coalition. Andrew will now provide us with instructions in the signing ceremony.
Thank you so much, Nacho and Ambassador Holliman. So our coalition members are, I think, all ready and lined up, which is terrific. In just a moment, Sandra will begin the process of passing down the terms of reference for signature by each member. And for our members who are here, the photographer will be taking individual pictures of your signing, as well as then we will do a series of collective photos together. So with that, if folks on this row right here, if we could just kindly ask you just for a few moments to move just to that side of the room, that would be really appreciated for the photographer. And then we will get started shortly. Okay, we will now ask just a moment for each coalition member to please stand. You have an extra copy of the terms of reference in front of you. So if you could now each stand, please, and hold the terms of reference facing the camera, the front. Everybody stand. We're going to take one wider photo, and then the photographer may ask you all to come in a little bit depending on his angle. And I think if anyone has any items they'd like to remove from the table for the photo, now would be just a good time just to put it on your chair. Thanks for everybody's patience. We'll try to remove the light from blinding your eyes. Do you have everything you need? Great, congratulations.
Congratulations to the members and partners of the Inter-American Coalition for Regulatory Convergence. Know that you have a strong support in your important work ahead. I would like to turn the floor to Christopher White, General Counsel and Chief Policy Officer of the AdvaMed Medical Technology Association, who will initiate the next session, and ask him, Lorena, and Ian to come where I am seated for the next session.
Here we go. Good morning. Good morning, and Nacho, thank you very much for opening our session, and congratulations to the members of the Inter-American Coalition. How exciting to finally gather in person and sign our joint declaration together. On behalf of AdvaMed, my colleague Stephen Bipes here and I, we look forward to working with you to advance our work together. So thank you and congratulations to all of us who've joined in person and virtually. It is my pleasure to initiate our next session. Before I do, however, I wanted to recognize and thank you, extend thanks to Nacho Abia for opening this session today and for your leadership on AdvaMed's board and within our industry. And as I reflect on your tenure on our board and your personal commitment to AdvaMed and the work that we discuss here today, it's just remarkable how important the executive engagement is to advance our work. We can spend a lot of time together in our coalition, but when world-leading executives such as Nacho speak about ethics and exemplify what it means for a company to operate on an ethical basis, it means a great deal. It accelerates our work, and it sends a strong signal to the industry and the patients we serve worldwide. So Nacho, thank you very much for your leadership on AdvaMed and your commitment, your personal commitment to the work that we've discussed here today. For those of you who are just joining us today, my name is Christopher White. I am the General Counsel and Chief Policy Officer of AdvaMed, an association of medical technology manufacturers based here in the United States in Washington, D.C. And it is a pleasure to join you all today. A key theme, as many of you may have heard yesterday, for this week's Summit of the Americas entails prioritizing the importance of democratic governance and strengthening our societies through ethical conduct and the prevention of corruption. And to the members of the coalition gathered here today, these are familiar themes. We've discussed these themes over a number of our meetings, and there is no industry sector that is more committed to these themes, I think, than the medical technology sector. Why is that? Well, it's important for the societies that we all serve. It's important to medical technology innovation as well. Innovation cannot occur in an environment that is not ethical and open and transparent. Innovation will wilt, and it will be stalled. Patients everywhere, certainly during the pandemic, have depended on the great innovations that our companies have brought to the market throughout the hemisphere, and that has occurred because we operate in accordance with the highest ethical standards. So it's essential not only to our economies, to trade, to governance, but it's important most of all to the patients we serve. In short, no patient anywhere in this hemisphere should have any question if the medical technology prescribed or used for them is provided other than in their very best interests. That's what brings us together. That exemplifies our commitment to ethics. That is why our work together is so important. And it aligns very well with the themes that the government ministers and dignitaries will discuss here at the Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles. It's also fitting and consistent with those themes that I share with you, as I did with the group yesterday, that AdvaMed has recently updated its code of ethics. We have long had a code of ethics that guides our industry's interactions across every interaction a medical device company has. We updated our code of ethics in part based on the pandemic, in part based on developments in technology. And that code went into effect for our members last week. And it's very exciting to join you here today. And I'm very pleased to share that we have now posted to our website translations of our code of ethics in Spanish and Portuguese. And we hope that that may be of value to the members of the coalition and to all of you gathered here. And we look forward to discussing those changes with any of you in greater detail. We reviewed them yesterday, and so I won't go back into some of the details that we've updated. I wanted to emphasize, however, that AdvaMed's commitment to its code and our coalition's work together is just one part of what it takes to ensure success. We've worked as a coalition for over 5 years to extend the Bogota principles and to realize the aspirations that we first had when we gathered in Bogota 5 or 6 years ago, and we've made tremendous progress. That progress was achieved through the great work and efforts of everyone in the room and many of your member companies and compliance officers and executives such as Nacho and others. But that alone will not ensure our success. As we discussed in our meeting yesterday, it takes an incredible partner in the form of governments around the world to work with us to ensure that we can advance this work together. And that's why I'm so excited to open our next panel and to introduce two, are there three, Andrew? Was Carolina joining us? Two, okay. Two very important public servants who have dedicated their careers to advancing these themes. And we look forward to learning more from them shortly. First, I'm very pleased to introduce our longstanding and outstanding partner, Ian Saunders. Ian is a U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Commerce in the Western Hemisphere, where Ian is responsible for 23 field offices across the region. Thank you for your work across the region and your longstanding service in government. And thank you too for your longstanding commitment and partnership with AdvaMed and with this coalition and your work around the world, the dedicated longstanding service of your colleagues, Lynn Costa and many others who have advanced our work together. And without your efforts, without your true partnership and the spirit that you infused in our work together, we would not be where we are today. So thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Ian, and thank you to all of your colleagues. I would say that the progress that we've made together as a public-private partnership just cannot be overstated. We can measure it in terms of the number of codes that have been developed since that time. We can measure it in terms of the alignment of those codes, the consensus building, the joint work that we've undertaken in terms of developing tools and so forth. We can measure trade, we can measure a number of metrics. But I think what matters most of all is the patient benefit that we've seen around the world. And at no time has that been more visible than over the past 2 years. So with the strong foundation that we first developed years ago, it brought incredible results and brought incredible meaning. So thank you again for your partnership, and we look forward to working with you far into the future. And Ian, before turning the floor over to you, I would like to introduce a distinguished guest who's traveled from Brazil. Thank you very much, Lorena, for joining us. We're very excited that you can join us, and we look forward to extending our work with you as well on behalf of the government of Brazil. And for those of you who are joining us today, you've heard from, some of you may have heard from Lorena yesterday, where she delivered an excellent presentation on Brazil's new procurement law. It was very helpful and serves as a model certainly for our region. But Lorena serves as a federal auditor of finance and control and coordinator of audit and health in the Comptroller General of the Union, or CGU. Lorena is a tremendously important figure within the Brazilian health system in ensuring the highest level of ethical standards. And thank you very much, Lorena, for joining us. We look forward to your remarks shortly. I think, Ian, with that introduction, I'll turn it over to you, and we look forward to your remarks and to furthering our work with you.
Good morning, everyone. And Chris, I want to thank you for that kind introduction. I want to thank AdvaMed for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to be part of this session. Just starting a very busy week with the Summit of the Americas, I can't think of a more fitting group to work with. You're working on timely issues and issues that really will define the success of what we're able to do together as countries for decades to come. And Chris, I want to thank you personally for your leadership, your visionary leadership in this space, because one of the things that makes ethics compliance and in fact tackling difficult issues like this possible is a leader that's willing to commit to the topic with partners that are willing to work with him or her. And I think that's what you represent, and that's certainly what the group here represents, is that type of commitment that will that has helped get us through the crisis that we are hopefully seeing ebb, but allows us to prepare for those that are potentially ahead of us in the future. So thank you for the opportunity. So the ethics and compliance work is multidimensional, and I'm very mindful of the shared responsibility that this work represents. From the government's perspective, certainly I'm mindful of the importance of our operating with fairness with our private sector partners. We have to ensure as governments that healthcare procurement is open and transparent, and the decisions that we make are in the best interests of our citizenry. On the private sector side, I'm mindful that the relationship works best when the private sector is also committed to integrity in its operations and ensuring that the relationship that it has with us as government institutions are built on trust and mutual respect. When both of us bring this disposition to the table together, we create an environment that allows fairness, accountability, responsibility, and transparency. And those principles become the norm of how we operate, not the exception. And that is a powerful example, I think, as we look at other environments, and a very important set of lessons learned as we look at these principles defining how government and the private sector work together. Sure. Of course. I'm gonna get the logistics right. I promise. But it's important that these principles become the norm of how we do business. And the work that you have done in this coalition to really elevate the conversation in the hemisphere around ethics compliance is commendable. It's a difficult conversation to have. It's a conversation that many aren't willing to have or have to deal with in a bit of an oblique way. But you have found a way to have this conversation constructively and productively, and to bring all of the players to the table to build consensus frameworks so that everyone coalesces around the best ideas, the ideas that represent the best of who we are and who we should be, because in your sector and in mine, we both represent very important public services. And at the end of the day, creating better lives for our citizenry is what we're both in our jobs to do. So I really appreciate the effort that it has taken to get to this point, and certainly look forward to much of the work that lies ahead. As a practical matter, I'm mindful that we do this work because we are looking at the possibility of positive benefits across the board. And if we get this work right, I think as a practical matter, it creates opportunities for companies to have fair and open opportunities to win contracts and export medical products into markets that genuinely need these products. The hard reality of the pandemic, I think, shows us that when we don't have this ability in place, there are consequences that come very quickly and very unfortunately to our people. So we have the possibility of creating environments that smooth out some of those difficulties that we've just lived through over the past few years. I think this is also an important opportunity to look at how we can pursue a policy objective that's very important to the Biden administration. And this is a focus on building the capacity of our small and medium-sized enterprises. I know in the healthcare sector, our large companies are the locomotives that power the system. But within those very large machines, there are individual gears, there are individual pistons, there are individual cogs that make the larger machine work. And in this analogy, I would say I would look at the small and medium-sized enterprises as those smaller pieces that help the larger system go. They're the sources of our innovation. They represent, in numerical terms, a large percentage of our private sector. And as we look at the reality of now having our economies in the position of having to recover from the economic downturn that accompanied the pandemic, ensuring that we look at ways to create openness and fairness for those players that don't necessarily have the capacity to navigate difficulties. creating an environment that allows them to flourish and to bring their best ideas forward into the real world. This is an opportunity. The structures that you have in place are an opportunity to bring all of the players together. That's what you've done. You've brought the large, the medium, and the small players together, all to be part of the conversation, all to figure out how to move forward in a positive way. And that, I think, is again a powerful example of what you've done and really speaks to the prospect of what this process can do in a region that desperately needs the work of the companies and governments together. The medical sector has been probably, in my short experience with the Department of Commerce, the most forward-leaning sector in this. And I think that is something that you should be commended for. And it's not just because of the acute need, it's because of a disposition even before the pandemic. This process, I know from Lynn, is more than a decade old. And it flourishes because you walked into this with a primacy of patient care, a primacy of taking care of people at the core of what you do, and making sure the infrastructure and the processes are in place to allow you to do that in a positive way. And we at the Department of Commerce have been very pleased to be partners with you in this process. We certainly look forward to its continuing. And I know that this has different branches. This process has evolved over time. Chris has mentioned the code of ethics, and the fact that that code of ethics is evolving and changing to address the realities of today, not just of the date that you first formulated it, is, I think, an important part of the process. But I know that you're also branching into other areas. The new coalition on regulatory convergence is something that we're very excited about, because as we look at what the pieces are of the system that need to work well, regulatory convergence, creating additional predictability, creating better understanding is going to be a very important part, because having worked in a very different regulatory sector for 20 years of my career, I understand that companies build their systems to ensure that they're able, legitimate companies build their systems to comply with the rules as they understand them. If the rules are too different from place to place, you have to build different models to respond to each set of questions that you get in each country. And to the extent that we can bring some of those differences together so that your infrastructure can be responsive to more than one market, and while providing the information that the governments genuinely need to ensure the safety of their people, that's the ideal situation. It lowers the amount of time and investment that you need to make, provides governments with the clarity that they need to ensure that what is coming into their country is safe and good for their people, and creates this smoothness that, as we look at a vision of how to make the Americas more competitive, how do we make this hemisphere a hemisphere of genuine partnership while the rest of the world confronts us with great uncertainty. The types of changes that you're making at the technical level, the types of conversations that you're bringing together with partners really do allow for very important progress and the potential to realize a hemisphere that is much more competitive and an example to other sectors as we look at how to create more resilient supply chains. I thought I was going to get the logistics right, but maybe it's conspiring against me or telling me I've talked too long. But I will just close at this point and say thank you for the opportunity to be here. Thank you for allowing me to share these thoughts. Congratulations on the partnership that you've had coming to this point, and congratulations in advance for all the work that you're going to do in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. Good morning, everyone. Once again, I would like to thank the coalition for the invitation, especially in such a special day like today. I'll proceed in Portuguese, okay? Bom, let me advance. Bom, meu objetivo hoje é
So my goal today is to show some initiatives of the Brazilian government regarding the strengthening of our governance. So here we have two frameworks regarding governance. One from 2017, when the governance policy was instituted in the federal government. So a committee between ministries was created where the Chief of Staff, the Ministry of Economy, and the Comptroller General are part of. We also published in the next year governance guidelines to clarify what it means to have such a policy in the federal government. Then in 2019, we created another framework, which was the creation of the Committee for Monitoring and Assessment of Public Policy. So it's our third assessment cycle, and public policies are chosen to be submitted to the governance assessment. So it's regarding the assessment of the governance policies, and we have several themes involved. One of the themes was the acquisition of biologicals. The second cycle in the health sector is the scientific development and the promotion of the federal government of the scientific development. This is a very interesting initiative, and this committee has the Controller General, the Ministry of Economy, and the Presidency. In 2020, we've had another initiative, and that was the publication of a long-term plan of the federal government from 2020 to 2031. And that is a declaration of the government planning. It defines our vision of the future, where we are and where we're going, to promote a coherent behavior of the bodies of the government. So stability and coherence of the federal government is important. There are 5 axes: economy, institution, infrastructure, environment, and social. The CGU is more part of an institutional branch, focusing on delivering services to the population, to improve our effectiveness and to favor the business environment. The indicators regarding the Controller General Office is the control of corruption and efficacy of the government. So how do we do that? Yesterday, I was talking on behalf of this Controller General. I'm not sure if you understand our structure, but we have 5 secretaries with different roles under Ministry Wagner Rosario. We have secretaries for internal control, secretaries to tackle transparency and corruption prevention. We have the Secretary of Fight Against Corruption and the Office of Controller General. We have about 2,000 civil servants, and we work throughout Brazil. Our headquarters is in Brasilia, but we have offices throughout the country. Our main strategic references are our strategic planning. So there we have our main goals: to strengthen transparency, increase the efficiency of the state and the quality of delivery to the population, and to strengthen the fight against corruption. Another strategic reference that we have is our chain of value. And it has values that are shared by us all here. What we want to deliver to the population is the transparency of the federal government, social control, integrity of public and private sector, improvement of the public management, and accountability. So there is a lot of alignment between the industry in our government and other governments in Latin America. So we want to show you how we assess our results. Every year we publish a report. We have numbers that express our goals. So here's the link to our report, so you can see all reports from every year. These are the results of 2021. And regarding transparency of the government, we've had over 22 million accesses to our portal where all our expenses are published. Regarding the integrity of public and private sector, we have over 40 programs that were assessed. And regarding improvement of the public management, during the assessment of public policy, we developed a way to measure our results, which are financial benefits, and we were able to save 32 billion Brazilian reals. And compared to our budget, it shows the effectiveness of these civil servants that are really engaged in improving the public management.
This is how we intend to have a match between our strategies and the strategy of the government. The federal strategy is translated into our organization, both in the value chain as well in our strategies, and that will define our tactical and operational actions. This is how we will pave the way of good governance, helping and working together with the federal government. And we're not alone in this journey. We're walking side by side, the private sector, the government, and different countries in the region. The idea is to work together towards a good governance level. This is our website if you wish to learn more about our work, and my contact information in case you have any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lorena and Ian. Thank you for your work together. Thank you for joining us today. I wonder whether any coalition members or others have questions for our panelists.
It's actually, my name is Carlos Gouveia from CBDL, Brazil, In Vitro Diagnostic Association. It's not actually a question, but just a remark. It's really an exciting moment for us to see such a number of people from different areas of the healthcare sector, but representing honestly and in a legitimate way how we can foster development through ethical and behavior, but especially through convergence. Some time ago, we used it to talk about harmonization. That's impossible. We know that it's probably never going to be achieved a completely harmonized system. But to converge is the first big step that we can take, and I am sure we are doing that. As Lorena just pointed out, this coalition and actually joint effort by private and public sectors together with different countries is a major indication that we are in the right pathway. So I appreciate the efforts of everyone. Lynn Costa, that's here, she's also very much responsible for this. And together with Andrew, Chris, and in the name of the coalition, we appreciate all the efforts that have been done. And thank you very much.
Thank you, very well stated. Are there other questions or comments from those in the room or online?
Chris, may I? Yeah. Well, thank you, Ian and Lorena, for your remarks. And again, more than a question, is really a comment and to emphasize the importance of what happened here today, right? So I think we're touching upon two of the most important topics for our industry in medical technology, right? So, I mean, ethics and compliance is definitely something that all companies and all stakeholders have to embrace. Because at the end of the day, what we try is to bring good to the world, and the only way to do that is with high level of integrity. The second part of this discussion today is regulatory conversion. I think that I cannot be more proud about this industry, because it's not easy to put together all the different trade associations in a large region of the Americas and agree on really work together in order to find that convergence. But I really need to ask as well the governments to help in that mission, because that's the largest barrier by far that companies, global companies, but also medium companies, right? So one of the barriers they have for middle and small companies to go abroad is that difference that we find in regulatory convergence all over the place. So I think the mission that, not the starting today, has been working. The work has been done for years, but I think the mission which is formalized today is really phenomenal. And from the private sector, I really encourage both this this group, but also the government to keep working in that direction. It's really appreciated, and ultimately it's going to benefit patients, which is the reason why we are for here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nacho.
Thank you, Chris. Actually, I want to congratulate AdvaMed and the coalitions as to the work that we have accomplished during these 2 years, and actually congratulate Lorena and Ian for the work that you guys are doing in each country. Just want to enforce the need of the strategy to work with the public sector. We need to focus to have a regulatory convergence and transparency and compliance in the public sector in order to have this relationship work both ways, because we can spend a lot of money and a lot of resources in the private sector as to how to do the code of ethics and the compliance. But if the other party is not understanding, it's very difficult. So ask you, Ian, to enforce this in the meetings that the government is going to have with the governments of the Americas in order to design a strategy of to how we can enforce these subjects with the public servants, because that's very important for countries like Ecuador, for example. We can go very far as the public sector, and we have proved them that they work together really can achieve anything that we can dream. The vaccination for us was an example, and we're using that example to put pressure on the public sector in order to work together. But I think if all the countries start thinking the same way and putting pressure each other, we can accomplish what we have planned.
Thank you. Any final questions? I think we have time for one more question. Any final thoughts or questions?
It's Mark Lloyd Davies from Johnson & Johnson. So I just also wanted to mention how important this initiative is and congratulate those who have really taken the leadership role and position for the benefits of operations, of course, for industry, but most of all for the benefits of the patients that we serve over the entire continents. Also to mention that although regulatory harmonization is a distant horizon and a big ambition, I think the real importance of regulatory convergence and making the first steps we've done today is as we think of the future and innovation, and we think of the future and really what my grandparents refer to as science fiction, but my children refer to as everyday technology. We do have technology down the road, which is in many ways the regulators, the stuff of science fiction. But as we converge more together, it will be exciting to see ways which we can find new regulations which will be more harmonized to ensure that innovation reaches patients faster and more quickly and more dramatically. So big thank you. I think not only is this a major step today, but it's creating also a very exciting future that patients and executives will be very grateful for. So thank you very much.
No, thank you all. Thank you all for your work together. Thank you to our distinguished panelists. Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to extending our partnership over the coming years as we work together as a coalition. I think, Andrew, that concludes this panel. We have one question, or we have one photo, and then I think we reset.
Yep. So thank you so much, Chris. And again, thank you, Ian and Lorena. We're now going to proceed. We're just waiting for our next session's speaker who's on the way. So we're going to take a short 5-minute break. So if folks wouldn't mind being back here in Los Angeles in the room at 10:08, that would be greatly appreciated. And for those online, we will be right back with you shortly. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Hector Orellana, Vice President for Medtronic for Northern Latam, Mexico, and Central America. It's a pleasure to be here today in person for this high-level joint session of the Inter-American MedTech Coalitions. Representing a company dedicated to removing all types of barriers between patients and life-saving and life-improving medical technologies, I can speak to the importance, not just for the work of the 2 Inter-American MedTech Coalitions, including the one we just launched here today, but of the criticality of the public and private cooperation to identify and remove bottlenecks, preventing access to medtech as we seek to defeat and recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. Medtronic advocates for the development and use of harmonized regulatory requirements and convergent regulatory systems promote the positively impact of the global public health through timely access to medical technologies, the predictable risk and capacity-based regulatory frameworks, and an efficient and an important use of the industry and health regulatory authorities' resources. Streamlined regulatory processes allow patients to access health technologies and innovation more quickly with less cost while promoting regulatory compliance globally. We are grateful to have had the cooperation of public authorities from across the Americas during the COVID to address various patient access challenges. This cooperation has been with trade authorities, health and regulatory authorities, as we have seen, custom authorities, standard bodies, and other, several of whom join us today here in Los Angeles. We wish to take the opportunity of this session to recognize the significant contributions of a particular agency that has facilitated and accelerated the cooperation between all the others. When COVID hit, the U.S. Agency for International Development stepped forward with its Standards Alliance initiative, providing an opportunity to work in collaboration with the medtech sector to address acute and long-term patient to medtech access challenges around the world, including in the Americas. Working in conjunction with the American National Standard Institute, the USA designated the administrator of the Standard Alliance, the medtech sector of the Western Hemisphere, as organized through the Inter-American Coalition for Regulatory Convergence and as represented in the United States by ADVAMED, has been proud to be a major contributing partner in the cooperative effort supporting the USAID COVID-19 Medical Device Regulatory Convergence Project, the MDRC. We are honored to have with us in person today Milady Guilarte, Deputy Assistant Administrator in the USAID Bureau for Latin America and the Caribbean. DAA Guilarte has been particularly active in our Latin American work, leading, for example, our high-level engagement with the Mexican Federal Commission for the Protection Against Sanitary Risk, COFEPRIS, where her direct interactions with Federal Commissioner Alejandro Sbarch has been extraordinarily promising with the MDRC and COFEPRIS efforts to implement good regulatory practice. DAA Guilarte, thank you for joining us in person here today for your remarks on cooperation with the MDRC. Thank you.
Thank you, Hector. Buenos días a todas y a todos. Good morning. I'm delighted to be here today representing USAID before a distinguished group of leaders of the medical device sector. I want to thank the Inter-American Coalition for Regulatory Convergence for their invitation. I also would like to thank and recognize ANSI and ADVAMED's partnership and contribution to COVID-19 Medical Device Regulatory Convergence project that we jointly fund through the Standards Alliance. MDRC is an excellent example of our successful public-private collaboration on a global scale. In addition to Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, and Peru, the project reaches Kenya, Ghana, South Africa, Indonesia, and Vietnam. Last year, I saw firsthand the project's potential when I witnessed the signing of the MOU between our agency, MDRC organizations, and Mexico COFEPRIS. The prospect of strengthening Mexico's regulatory framework using the latest international benchmarks with world-class technical assistance created enthusiasm in our partner governments. Colombia has shown a similar interest in meeting MDRC objectives on good regulatory practices and medtech regulations. And this year, responding to the government's request, MDRC deployed a consultant to assist the authorities in pursuing the MDRC objectives. In 2020, when the pandemic was ramping up, USAID saw firsthand how partner countries and companies around the world struggled to source the required medical technology. We heard from you about the challenges to keeping supply chains running. We heard from partner countries about the difficulties of implementing against the clock regulatory frameworks that could control access to safe and quality medtech innovations coming online. I am sure you have many stories to share. Faced with the one science in a lifetime challenge, USAID jumped into action doing what is known best, leading the US government effort to deal with a complex humanitarian crisis. We have worked and continue to work on vaccinating the world, saving lives, and building back better. In this effort, we have partnered with government, civil society, and the private sector to deliver and distribute vaccines, protect and train healthcare workers, and of course, strengthen regulatory frameworks among many other activities. Our strategy to fight the pandemic has 5 key objectives. 1, accelerate widespread and equitable access to and delivery of safe and effective COVID-19 vaccinations. Objective 2, reduce morbidity and mortality from COVID-19 and mitigate transmission and strengthen health system, including to prevent, detect, and respond to pandemic threats. Objective 3 is to address acute needs driven by COVID-19, mitigate household shocks, and build resilience. The 4th objective is to bolster economic and other critical systems under stress due to COVID-19 to prevent backsliding and enable recovery. And our 5th objective is to prevent, detect, and respond to pandemic threats. USAID activities that support these objectives include, of course, the MDRC project, but includes procuring COVID-19 diagnostic test kits, increasing oxygen supply and capacity, and vaccine designation. As of March of this year, the US government has delivered more than 64 million doses of COVID-19 to 29 countries in the LAC region. Total USAID funding for the LAC COVID-19 response amounts to over $500 million. Unlike cooperation from other sources, our come with strings attached and will not go against countries' democratic values. As I said, our response and the technical assistance underpin the 5 objectives that I outlined. In that context, there's always an opportunity to sit down with us to coordinate engagement around COVID-19 response, especially with the private sector. USAID is always open to listening to your great idea, so I definitely welcome the opportunity to hear from you as well. It should be remembered that USAID is committed to transforming the way in which US assistance is conceived, designed, and delivered. We're using market-based approaches and working closely with the private sector to achieve greater outcomes. Like the Standards Alliance and its MDRC project show, we pursue a strategic collaboration through which we work hand in hand and build relationships with the private sector that create opportunities for generating ideas jointly. This early and often engagement allow USAID and partners to understand perspective and jointly identify market-based solutions. Under our private sector engagement policy, USAID functions as a facilitator, a convener, a catalyst, and a thought leader. We bring to the table strong in-country networks and relationships, support to strengthen enabling environments, risk mitigation, credible convening power, and much more. In Latin America and the Caribbean, for example, we have worked with US Chamber of Commerce to produce profiles for 5 countries to ensure that local and international private sector partners know how they can help these countries fight the pandemic. This collaboration provides capacity to quickly scale successful proposals, align with sustainability goals, and natural business reach. You are able to contribute your ability to influence policy, innovation, expertise, and capabilities in efficient and effective ways. Your engagement with us delivers greater scale and sustainability to the impact of our work. So I invite you to partner with us. Thinking about the future of COVID-19, we're not under any illusions. We know that the fight against it will continue to be difficult, and it is a path that we need to walk together. Responding Building Back Better will require joint efforts, such as those undertaken by the MDRC Public-Private Partnership in collaboration with partner governments. In its short life, the MDRC already has some lessons to share. It is clear that the private sector is the driving force behind effective and sustainable innovation in healthcare. Hence, sustainable technical assistance related to medical technology needs to have collaboration with the private sector. MedTech innovation runs on its own speed, often at a very accelerated pace, and regulatory frameworks need to be adaptive and responsive to this reality. This, of course, creates a challenge to domestic authorities that unfortunately always struggle to keep up with innovations, either because of lack of financial resources or limited access to technical capacity. For instance, today we're witnessing how software as a medical device is making inroads in healthcare space. Yet very few agencies have access to the required information technology professionals to understand it fully. Outlining these advancements is not an answer that advances the objectives of domestic healthcare systems. Regulatory systems need to be streamlined and aligned with international standards to attract companies and speed market access. National regulatory authorities require skilled staff to optimize procedures for the full range of capabilities, including trial oversight, inspection of manufacturers, market authorization reviews, and post-market surveillance for quality safety, among other functions. Embracing and adopting international references and benchmarks can bring the needed relief to regulatory systems with endangering populations. And USAID works to support countries with regulatory systems reform to mitigate medical product shortages, facilitate the timely introduction of safe, effective, quality assured medical products, identified and remove substandards and falsified products from the market, and improve regional regulatory collaboration and coordination. Relying on the work that is carried out by more advanced regulators, such as the US FDA, is also a cost-effective alternative. As processes that improve the quality of regulations, good regulatory practices, enhance transparency and accountability, and are a key contributing factor to having more robust domestic frameworks that better achieve legitimate public health objectives. We invite our partner countries to use GRP. Often health authorities miss considering international trade commitments when developing regulations. Unfortunately, commitments such as those made at the World Trade Organization apply to medical technology products and services. The effects of missing them can be twofold: involuntary, creating a barrier to imported medical technology, and limited patients' access to much needed technology. These problems can be easily preventable if regulators proactively reach out to domestic agencies responsible for trade policy to discuss the trade implications of planned regulations. Good domestic coordination is a regulatory process, can avoid unnecessary headaches and save lives. With that, I leave you. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Assistant Administrator Gilarte. We really cannot stress strongly enough the significant impact of the MDRC is already having in the GRP implementation in the region, and how this stands to enable us to leap forward in medical device regulatory convergence through the use of the international standards. We also wish to recognize the fantastic collaboration we have with both the USAID trade team in form of Daniel Vasquez, and also with the Global Health team, working in conjunction in a unique cross-functional team to address medtech bottlenecks spanning the trade and the health disciplines. We are pleased with the pace in meeting our MDRC project metrics, and we look forward to announcing the finalized package of the project results by 2024 with a seminal methodology and demonstrable health and trade outputs and outcomes. Enabling the MDRC cooperation between ADMA-Med, the broader medtech sector, and the USAID in the American International Standard Institute, ANSI, as the USAID designated administrator of the Standard Alliance Initiative. ANSI serves several roles, including as the administrator and coordinator of the US Voluntary Standards and Conformity Assessment Systems. Joining us virtually today representing ANSI is Joseph Friedler, Jr., Vice President for International Policy. Joe, we welcome your remarks and our cooperation in the important work that the MDRC under the Standards Alliance Phase 2. Please.
Thank you, Hector. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd also like to offer thanks to our organizer, the Inter-American Coalition for Regulatory Convergence, and on behalf of the American National Standards Institute, let me state that we are proud to see the Summit of the Americas hosted in the United States for the first time in a generation. As I said, it's a privilege to be with you here today, joined by leaders and representatives from all over the Americas, including my colleagues from national standards bodies in Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, and Peru that are participating today as an integral part of this project. As you know, the world has suffered greatly due to the COVID-19 pandemic, from the tragic loss of life to an overwhelming disruption of our approach to daily activities. In the standardization community, we have missed networking opportunities and in-person interactions that are an important element of our work. I trust that the trainings that occur here and the conversations that go on between the sessions are fruitful, productive, and help advance health sector standardization progress in your own countries. I do regret not being able to join you in person today, but I'm glad that one of my ANSI colleagues is there on site to participate this week. Before diving into the successes of the MDRC, I want to share a bit of background on ANSI for those who may not be aware. ANSI is a private sector, not-for-profit organization. We coordinate the U.S. Voluntary Standards and Conformity Assessment System and strive to strengthen its impact. We speak as the U.S. voice in international standardization, and we're the official representative and the national standards body to ISO, and via our U.S. National Committee to IEC, two of the largest and most recognized standardization organizations in the world. Since ANSI was formed just over 100 years ago, it has provided a neutral forum for our members and others to come together on standardization issues. Our membership includes industry, government agencies, standards developers, conformity assessment bodies, academia, consumers, and others. Our broad and diverse range of stakeholders is the strength of our standard system, a system we facilitate and coordinate and provide safeguards to ensure its integrity, a role we take very seriously. One of the greatest strengths of the U.S. standardization system is the public-private partnership that sits at its foundation. Unlike other countries that have a top-down government-driven standards of conformance system, the U.S. approach is bottom-up, private sector-led and public sector supported, and it is a market-driven system. It engages all affected stakeholders in the development of consensus-based standardization solutions for the country and the world. I mention these details about the U.S. system and ANSI's role because they help illustrate the network of expertise that is brought to bear in cooperative activities and dialogues led under the banner of ANSI and our partners. Today, I'd like to focus on one of those activities, the COVID-19 Medical Device Regulatory Convergence Project, or MDRC. The MDRC, as mentioned, is a project of the Standards Alliance Phase 2 project. It is a public-private partnership between ANSI and USAID, as well as a collaboration among U.S. private sector partners, U.S. government experts, and USAID-eligible countries. It is intended to help develop successful national quality infrastructure in our partner economies. The activities under the Standards Alliance umbrella have also recently been recognized by the White House as part of the United States Trade Representative's Trade Plan for 2022. The Standards Alliance works in a variety of program areas, including water and sanitation, clean energy, and infrastructure. But the one we're here to talk about today is focused on reducing the spread of COVID-19 and helping build capacity for future health events. The MDRC is the largest work stream of the Standards Alliance and includes 9 countries across 4 continents working to increase the production of and access to medical devices and PPE. It does this by focusing on developing good regulatory practices, reducing technical barriers to trade, and increasing countries' capacity for standards and conformity assessment. ANSI's partner leading the implementation of the project is our member association, AdvaMed, and 4 of our project countries from the Americas region, as I mentioned earlier, are represented here today. The project began in 2020 and will continue through 2024, and we've already started to see some progress. So let me share with you some of the successes we've experienced so far, as well as what we're looking forward to in the future. I do not need to emphasize for this audience the challenges posed when healthcare providers have trouble accessing reliable medical equipment, or the enormous impact that has on the global medical devices market. We are all here because we understand that standards are necessary both to facilitate this access and to ensure safety and public health, and those things happen through regional cooperation. In order for doctors and patients to get access to high-quality PPE, countries have to be aligned on technical regulations and standards for medical technology and comply with and implement World Health Organization requirements for regulatory convergence and implement good regulatory practices. During the first project years of the MDRC, AdvaMed identified between 10 and 20 regulatory non-alignments among project countries. But through workshops, through training, public-private partnerships, and a lot of hard work, they're working to eliminate those barriers to trade and to create more fruitful international cooperation that results in saved lives. And this is a significant breakthrough. Another significant accomplishment is the development of a report containing a review of good foundational regulatory practices in all 9 MDRC partner countries. It's a first of its kind live document that reviews, maps, and grades the regulatory landscape of each country. It measures the degree to which a project country satisfies an indicator in both a visual and a narrative format, and it will be updated throughout the project. The document is a working assessment and will be available publicly at the end of the project through the Standards Alliance website, and it will be available in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. A third success is the way the MDRC has been leading the fight for gender equality, monitoring every training, workshop, and activity to include the diversity of women in all areas of medical device regulatory convergence. The MDRC conducted outreach within its partner countries to discover their existing policies, programs, and measures promoting gender equality. To date, 10 laws, policies, or measures promoting gender equality have been implemented, and we expect more to come in the remaining 2 years of the project. This is an exciting accomplishment that we are proud to celebrate. So with just 2 years left in the program, we still have a long and exciting road ahead of us. Our main goal is that by the end of the project, Standards Alliance countries are using a national quality infrastructure based on international best practice. To achieve that, we have a number of objectives and intermediate results that are tracked by dozens of indicators, targets, and activities. These range from high-level reductions of technical barriers to trade to the creation of a COVID-19 medical device portal, which compiles information from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration and relevant agencies on the newest medical devices released by industry to fight the COVID-19 pandemic. These activities on their own are already helping to breed an environment that fosters trade, regulatory compliance, and access to PPE. But as part of this project, they are also creating international cooperation and increasing the level of standards in healthcare at a level that has never been done before. This year's American Business Dialogue Priorities asks the question, how might the Americas cooperate in ways that eliminate poverty and establish a developed economy for all? Well, that doesn't stop at economic growth, and none of it will happen without strong partnerships and cooperation, both in the public and private sector throughout the Americas. I'm proud that one of our projects can contribute positively for this region, and I'm honored to be able to share it with you as an example of what our partnership and collaboration can accomplish. I'd like to thank USAID, the team at AdvaMed, and the MDRC, as well as our partner countries, Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, and Peru, for being part of and pioneering such an important project. We are looking forward to all that it will be accomplished and the lives that will be saved due to our work here. Thanks again for the opportunity to speak with you today.
Joe, thank you for the strong partnership and excellent collaboration with you and your team. In particularly, we wish to acknowledge the dynamic and effective work of Leslie McDermott, Jessica Roop, and Meredith Shaddix. We as a sector, Joe, recognize the core responsibilities that we have as an industry in the regulatory and standardization processes. Good and effective technical regulations do not happen by themselves. They require a solid, good regulation practices framework. They require that the regulatory authorities base their technical regulations upon relevant international standards, that the governments also notify draft technical regulations to the World Trade Organization as mentioned, and that the industry track these notifications and provide comments on them in a timely manner. The MDRC project has been an unprecedented mobilizer toward this end, building capacities with the public and private sector on their respective roles in GRP and regulations and standards and health and trade to more readily achieve medical device regulatory convergence and the elimination of the COVID-19 medtech bottlenecks. We also want to recognize Chris White, who's as Chief Policy Officer at AdvaMed, worked with the AdvaMed board leadership to shepherd through and secure their support for this multi-year project. Since 2020, when the pandemic started, the organizations in general have faced unprecedented challenges. In addition to presenting the medtech sector and companies such as Medtronic to mobilize and ramp up production of critical medical devices and tests, and navigating turbulent times with many healthcare procedures being put off with impacts for the association, AdvaMed stepped forward offering to work with USAID, ANSI, and its partners worldwide to tackle some of the thorniest regulatory and trade problems impeding an effective global response. So thank you, Chris, for your leadership in this collaborative effort. And I also want to thank governments already mentioned as Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, and Peru for the direct engagement in the MDRC and the governments of other countries in the region who are MDRC partners at regional level. With that, please join me thanking Deputy Assistant Administrator Guilarte and Joe for their remarks here today and for their perspective, institutional support and cooperation enabling the COVID-19 medical device regulatory convergence project. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bueno, para nuestra última sesión, for our final session, we pull the elements of our joint session today together to address the role of the good regulatory practices and anti-corruption in the context of driving the regional trade and investment. We have as regional economic anchors in the hemisphere, the United States for one side and in the other, Brazil. Brazil has been moving or leading the GRP implementation and anti-corruption systems. In addition to implementing various GRP measures, which are good for the trade and transparency, Brazil is well on its way to acceding to which the board, private sector, and medtech industry strongly support. Brazil and the United States also negotiated, signed, and secured approval of a meaningful trade protocol in record time, also during the challenging period of the COVID. The protocol includes new binding commitments on trade facilitation, good regulatory practices, and anti-corruption implementing tool to address non-tariff barriers equivalent to 6 times existing tariff barriers. The protocol takes significant strides toward the less bureaucratic business environment in Brazil as well as towards unleashing the economic potential that Brazil has domestically with the United States and with its other trading partners. Leading those negotiations from the Ministry of Economy was our closing keynote speakers, Daniela Ferreira de Matos, Deputy Foreign Trade Secretary with the Brazilian Minister of Economy. Deputy Ferreira de Matos, we are delighted to have you here with us in person this morning. We welcome your views and the actions that Brazil and the Ministry have taken, driving regional trade and investment, including through the good regulatory practice anti-corruption. Please.
Thank you, Hector. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the Intercoalition for inviting me. I prepared some presentations. Not sure how to do them all. There it is. Okay, so I'm focusing here today on the role of good regulatory practices and anti-corruption on driving trade and investment. Good regulatory practices and anti-corruption are crucial for improving business environment, building confidence, democratic governance, and facilitating trade and investments. It provides for transparency, rational decision-making, and predictability. As it provides for a sound business environment, it increases private interest in the country, and it attracts foreign direct investment and trade. As Milady mentioned, good regulatory practices tend to intensify international trade because the consolidation of good regulatory practices by regional partners reduces the possibility of applying unnecessary barriers to trade and facilitating the flow of goods and services. At the Ministry of Economy, we have estimates that the state administrative inefficiency or bad regulation is estimated to represent 13% of the Brazil cost. That's around $30 to $40 billion. Comparing to estimates of the costs of tariff protection in Brazil, which are not low, this is supposed to be equivalent. So the conclusion is bad regulations are expensive. But the problem is that it's usually much more harder to tackle this issue than just reduce tariffs, which is not easy either in Brazil, but to deal with within the border issues is much more difficult than to deal at the border issues. So in Brazil, we're fully committed to a broad economic reform and to promote good regulatory practices. I believe that Secretary Lorenzo yesterday provided for some of the domestic initiatives we have been conducting in Brazil, which include the Economic Freedom Law and its 4 regulatory decrees that provide for review of regulations, the mandatory impact assessments, acceptance of regulations that are used abroad, and many other ideas. We also have the regulatory agencies law, the Brazil Public Procurement Law that I believe Lorena has explained yesterday as well, and the Business Environment Law. So these domestic initiatives seek to provide a sound business environment and to promote good regulatory practices in Brazil. At the international level, Brazil has recently adhered to 2 OECD recommendations, which is the improving the quality of government regulation and regulatory policy governance. We also have been cooperating with our friends from the Department of Commerce from the United States. We have the commercial dialogue, and we also always discuss good regulatory practices, standards. So we seek to reduce barriers in bilateral trade. And of course, trade agreements. We have seek to include good regulatory practices and anti-corruption provisions in our trade agreements. So I would highlight Brazil-Chile FTA. It was signed in 2018 and it entered into force recently. It has a good regulatory practices chapter. the Brazil-US Protocol on Trade Rules and Transparency, as Hector just mentioned, it has three annexes, one on trade facilitation, one on good regulatory practices, and one on anti-corruption. And of course, Brazil's accession to the Government Procurement Agreement at the WTO, which is also called the Anti-Corruption Agreement. And Brazil is also part of the plurilateral agreement at WTO, the Services Domestic Regulation, which is essentially good regulatory practices applied to foreign service providers. So just highlighting some of the provisions on these trade agreements that I mentioned, our annex with the United States, these are the most important provisions. It provides for a central coordinating mechanism. The idea is a body or a mechanism that can coordinate and review the implementation of good regulatory practices within the federal government. We have this provision of mandatory public consultations, so we can increase the participation of the private sector and the civil society in regulatory processes. We have the obligation and mandatory publication of a regulatory agenda, and also a mandatory provision to review regulations in effect to verify if the regulation achieved its objectives, if it is still relevant, or if the current circumstances provide alternatives to the regulation. And of course, mandatory regulatory impact assessments. The anti-corruption annex is one of the first trade agreements that contains provisions on anti-corruption. It reinforces legislative obligations that Brazil and the US already assumed in multilateral instruments. And the idea is that it reinforces our mutual commitment to the fundamental elements necessary for a fair shake on trade. And of course, speaking about the government procurement agreement, it is quite relevant to stress our full commitment on acceding to this important agreement still this year. As I mentioned, it's called the Anti-Corruption Agreement, and it's not because of any other reasons that it provides for transparency, non-discrimination in bidding process, and it leans towards more efficiency and cutting costs in public purchases, with positive consequences in the area of combating corruption. It promotes greater competition, stimulates innovation, productivity, and competitiveness, resulting in better quality and lower prices for government contracts. It also assures a potential market for Brazilian firms. It is estimated at $1 trillion per year of purchases from the members of the government procurement agreement. And it will promote the internalization of national diverse economic groups. We hope to seize the momentum and ensure our acceptance. And Brazil will be the first Latin American country to be a part of this agreement. I would also like to highlight some of our Secretariat initiatives on promoting good regulatory practices. We have been working really hard to implement the best regulatory practices in our day-to-day work. Since 2020, we began publishing the Foreign Trade Yearbook. We now publish impact assessments for all our trade agreements. The picture is our impact assessment for the free trade negotiations between Mercosur and Singapore, but we have with Canada, South Korea, and every other ongoing negotiations. We conduct public consultations for all our regulations, and we conduct impact assessments for regulations that are expected to have a significant impact on trade. For example, we conducted an impact assessment on the regime of remanufacturers goods imports, and we're now preparing the regulation for publication. And we also promote good regulatory practices within the federal government, specifically with bodies that are directly involved in import licensing. So we provide and promote good regulatory practices, so they have mandatory public consultations and conduct impact assessments before imposing an import licensing. We have a presidential decree being drafted on this topic, and also a presidential decree being drafted on good regulatory practices in a more broad aspect. Moving on to my concluding remarks, good regulatory practices in anti-corruption are essential for a sound business environment. However, they are complex because the regulations affecting trade involve many different actors. So there is a hard effort needed to coordinate within the federal government. It's usually not a simple or straightforward solution. It's not only, let's reduce a tariff. It usually involves many different aspects. So that's why following good regulatory practices is essential. However, more and more, this is trade in the 21st century. So we can't look away. We have to deal with it. And the inclusion of disciplines in trade agreements and other international commitments feed back into domestic processes. So the Foreign Trade Secretariat is fully committed on promoting good regulatory practices and anti-corruption, as we have this evaluation that it promotes trade, it promotes foreign direct investment. And Brazil is fully committed with this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Ferreira Matos, for your remarks and your leadership in taking Brazil on the next level on the GRP and anti-corruption, leveraging trade tools to move us collectively forward this direction. This is not only beneficial for Brazil and our working in and with Brazil, but also in a broader effort to improve the public administration, trade, and health in the region. As a region recovers from the pandemic, there is both an urgent need and an unmatched opportunity to create resilience in our health and in ecosystems. Building such resilience will require us to rethink our approach to strengthen those systems, including supply chain, regulatory issues, digital health, financing, and so many others. Leaders from public and private sectors and civil society must partner to drive progress in regulatory convergence and business integrity. This includes work with the Foreign Trade Office, with the Office of the Secretariat for Economic Monitoring, Competition, and Competitiveness Advocacy, as represented here today by Gianluca Lorenzo, and with other entities such as Inmetro, represented here today by its presidents, Marco Eleno Gerso de Oliveira Jr. All of these entities having critical roles on the implementation of the GRP that can be facilitated through the work you have led as a foreign trade secretary. Thank you once again. With that, I would like to close this session. I would like to recognize the other honored guests the MedTech coalitions have joined us here in person and virtually, among them, the Colombian Minister of Trade, the Colombian National Planning Department, the Mexican Secretary of Economy, the standard body from Brazil, Colombia, and Mexico in the form of ABNT, Econtech, and DGN, and many others who join us here in person in Los Angeles and online. We are prepared to contribute to the work required to achieve our objectives and look forward to realizing and recognizing them at the next summit. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Hector and Daniela. So for those that are joining online, as Hector said, that concludes today's joint session.